All right. Well, who are you? What do you do? Where are you from? Tell me about yourself.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's nice
I'm
to
your
meet
father,
you as well.
Jonathan Wiggins, a name that you are familiar with.
Yeah.
You asked me who I am. What do I do?
Yeah. What do you do?
I'm a pastor. I lead teams. I work with pastors nationally who are at different places of stress and burnout because being a pastor can be a tough job.
Mm.
Not like being a parent to you, but being a pastor in general can be a tough job. I'm just giving him a hard time. We have to work on this dynamic so he has some humility with his dad today.
I make being a pastor easy for you.
Is that right?
There you go.
Yeah, but then I should probably say thank you.
It's all relative, yeah.
So in a couple of places, the church, we invest, and then I help lead soul care retreats where pastors go. And so that's what I do. And then I'm a husband and a father and a grandfather, thanks to you.
There you go.
I have some of the most beautiful grandkids in the world, so that's me.
So what made you want to become did you want to be a pastor like from a young age, or what kind of led you into that?
I was raised in the Bible Belt, and a lot of my week was spent in church. So I went to a Christian private school that was in a church building. And then we had, back in the day, you would have Sunday morning and Sunday night church.
Okay.
And Wednesday night church.
Yep.
So I heard 3 messages a week at least. And then we would have, they called them revivals, where we would have a week or two of guest speakers and worship leaders coming in. So I spent a lot of time around those people, and some of them became my heroes. And probably that's why I saw myself doing ministry in life. And then my teachers and my dad used to tell me that I was really good at arguing.
Okay.
And they said, you should be an attorney.
Yeah.
So I thought about that and almost went. I actually had a full ride to law school, and then I walked away from it to stay in the ministry.
Yeah.
So those are the 2, I guess, dreams I had, and I do not regret walking away from that. I love what I do.
Yeah. Did you have a good childhood?
Wait a minute. It's funny that you're asking me questions you obviously know the answers to.
Well, but for the audience,
I love it. There were good parts about my childhood. My father was a broken man, and he was abusive. And one of the things I've learned in life, and I've been this way myself, is when you're hurting, you can be very selfish. And pain makes us self-focused. Yeah. And so my dad was very self-focused, and so he would lash out at us. He was punitive. He was physically abusive. He crossed a lot of boundaries with not just me, but me and my brother and sister. I'm the youngest of 3. And I ended up leaving home at 16. I had a mentor who I started to confide in, a therapist who...
You left home for what reason?
To get away from abuse.
Yeah.
So I still had some time left in school, but I was able to work.
Did you go to that Christian school from literally preschool or kindergarten till 12th grade?
Yes. So Richland Christian Academy, RCA, was the school. My dad started it, my mom and dad. And so I started there from kindergarten, and then through 9th grade, then homeschooled through the same school. So they still provided curriculum for 10th and 11th grade. And in the 11th grade year, I doubled up and did 2 years of high school. So I didn't really have a 12th grade experience. I just finished 11th and 12th grades. Started college when I was 16.
There you go. So what was your, so you started college when you were 16. What was your major? Why did you go to college that young? And what was your experience like the first go around?
I don't remember my major. I went to, now it's called University of Louisiana at Monroe. At the time, it was Northeast Louisiana University. I think it may have been something like occupational therapy or something. I had no idea what to do. I don't know. When you first went to school, did you know exactly what you wanted?
Nope.
I don't think a lot of people do when they start, and I didn't. So Did that for 2.5 years. And then when I was 19, because I was working 3 jobs and doing school from 16 to 19, and I just didn't maintain my classes. So I just walked away. Got a little bit of a bump in income because I was able to spend more time working, but it was a decision that I regretted for a long time and actually went back and rectified later.
Okay, so what were you doing for work at that time, and what did you need to rectify, or what did you rectify?
So I led worship, so musical worship in church. I led worship at Providence Church, which is my wife's dad's church.
Yeah.
I did Saturday night church at a place called Christian Life Fellowship. I did Thursday night church at a place called City of Faith. And so then all the rehearsals and then having teams and kind of doing all that. So I had those 3 things. Plus, so I said 3 jobs. Plus I mowed, did landscaping for a really large, like a campground ranch property.
Yeah. Was that your own business, or did you work under somebody?
I just worked for it was called Christian Life Fellowship, the campground. So I did music there on Saturday, but then I would weed eat and mow every week out there.
So, and then before you glance over it, so at 16 you left your house because of an abusive household. How did that situation play out? Was that your own decision to leave, or did somebody step in, and what was the situation there?
It kind of came to a head. I ran away, but I didn't have many friends, so Dad didn't have to exactly be CIA to find me.
Wait, what I mean? Hold on. I didn't know this. Okay, so you ran away. Why did you run away, and where did you go?
So,
was there an event? Was there a particular event that occurred that sparked that?
I was 16 years old. My dad wouldn't let me even lock my door. He went through all my stuff. He was triggered very easily. He would punch and slap and he would, if he was going to ground me, wouldn't be for a week. It would be like for 6 months. And so it was just so much pressure.
Well, you didn't have phones back then, so what were you being grounded from?
Yeah, just carrier pigeons.
No carrier pigeons for 6 months.
Oh my God. Yeah, just
no stone
tablets. Believe it or not, we had landlines. So I mean, I was dating a girl, and he thought he saw me give her a kiss. She actually had the car, so she dropped me off, and he thought he saw me give her a kiss, and so he told me I could never see her again, and just stuff like that. Just anything that I did was unacceptable and was the end of the world. And so I'd been around enough friends and healthier families. I knew something was wrong. Yeah. So I reached out to my best friend. His name's Stacy Skipper, and he's still actually one of my closest friends. He's still back in Louisiana. And I asked him, could I come stay at his house for a while? Packed my stuff, left. Dad came home and asked Mom where I was, and she started crying. And so he...
Did she know where you were?
She knew, yeah.
Okay.
She didn't tell him, but there were only 2 options, and he guessed right the first time. Yeah. So he picked me up, actually threatened the family. I didn't realize we were going to talk about this, so sorry I'm not more organized with these memories, but he threatened the family where I was staying that he would he'd press charges for kidnapping if they didn't make me go out and meet with him. And so we get in the car, and he's driving, and he just starts punching this leg because I'm in the passenger side. He's just punching the same spot on my leg, which I'm sure you've played games with people where you punch each other or something. Have you ever done something like that?
Slug bug, yeah.
Where you hit in the same spot? That hurts.
Yeah.
After a few.
But he was doing that out of anger.
Oh yeah, I was scared. So
and I'm sure that really made you want to stay home and be like, you know what? I see the error of my ways now, and now I really want to live with you.
Not exactly. I mean, maybe that should have been my response, but no, I didn't feel safe. And So I asked him, could we go see Miss Molly, who's the therapist I was referring to earlier. He said yes, and I don't know why he said yes, but I'm real glad. I'm glad he did.
This was a family therapist that would meet with your whole family, or just with you, or with your dad?
Actually,
And
she was because my dad at that time was in school to be a therapist, so he was interested in getting good connections, and she was really connected.
Yeah.
She was also a believer and connected through some church relationships that we had. So he trusted her, and she didn't really understand what was going on at the time until we went that evening to her home office, and we sat down, and I basically told her what Dad was doing, and I wasn't in the room. She asked me to leave once I said all that stuff because it was pretty heavy. But what I
do you remember if your dad was talking during that, or did he just let you go for whatever the amount of time was?
So Miss Molly was blind. She lost her vision at 21. And so she goes into her office, and I'm sitting in one chair. Dad's sitting across the other chair, and he starts talking. Jonathan's embarrassed me. He ran away. And she said, actually, I think I want to hear from Jonathan first. So she turns toward me, and so she doesn't know this, but Dad makes eye contact and does this, like, don't. That's what's so strange. He drove me there, but I don't think I had never talked to anybody before, so I don't think he had any fear that I would open up. So making eye contact with him, I told her everything I could think to say.
As he's shaking his head no.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he was very angry. Then she asked me to step out, and after that, he and I, what I think happened, although I never did ask Miss Molly, I think she negotiated me moving out. My theory is in exchange for not reporting it. I could be wrong, but the fact is she did not report it, and I pretty quickly after that was allowed to move out instead of run away.
Yep.
So,
and then what resulted? So where did you move to, first of all? And then what was like the immediate aftermath of you all of a sudden, like, you're not even living with your family anymore? Was that a weird concept to you, or were you used to that because you had already thought about the idea of running away?
Well, I still would see them. And I had just gotten a job in Lake Providence at a church there. So I had a reason to be there in Lake Providence, which is about an hour from where I had been living.
Yeah.
Had a lot of friendships there. Amy was there, so I was super pumped about living in that town. You know,
oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Near
a beautiful woman.
Yeah. So honestly, from the moment I talked to Miss Molly in her office, Dad never hit me again. I think it scared him.
Yeah.
So it's amazing what light will do to a person's behavior.
Yeah.
Sometimes we think we're protecting people by not shining light on it, and sometimes I just think, well, in my experience, you shine light, people behave themselves typically.
Right. Yeah. Well, they feel exposed, and they know what they're doing is wrong. And there's a reason he looked at you and shook his head no during that session. It's like, don't tell her, because he knew what he was doing was wrong, you know?
Yeah. Yep. We've talked through the years, and it's funny. Dad will sometimes own it. Sometimes he has no memory of it. I can't make sense of that. So I've had to resolve all that within my own soul, but I can't depend on him to own it and apologize and that be stable.
Right.
You know?
So then you start worship leading at this church in Lake Providence where this beautiful woman is attending. And what happened after that? What happened there? And then how long did you stay there for? What happened with the beautiful woman? All that type of stuff.
Well, I fell in love with her before she fell in love with me. I know that.
Okay.
We would break up. Oh my goodness. Seems like every 3 months she would go out with somebody else and I would be jealous, you know, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But over time, I won.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. So I started at 16 working at Providence Church. And then, trying to think, I think I was there 9 years. So at 25, Amy and I left to do, I started traveling and doing ministry in different churches.
25 years at...
No, 9 years. I was 25 years old.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. Yes. So
Yep.
you did that for 9 years. Oh, by the way, before we glance over it, what was your dad's occupation while you were a kid and going through
Well,
all
he
this?
was a pastor as
Okay.
well, and
Yeah.
then he got a degree in therapy. In my
He was
experience,
a pastor for how long? Like since you were born
yeah.
to how old?
I think, well, he left the ministry when I was maybe 13 or 14.
Yeah.
He had a personal scandal, and that blew up the church. And
Would you mind disclosing what that scandal is, or do you not want to talk about that?
well,
You don't have to if you don't want to.
no, I mean, I've actually shared this in other podcasts. I just, it's funny. So like when you ask me to talk about this, typically I would have an idea and then prepare.
Well, I know most of the answers to these questions, but I still just want to talk to you about it.
All right, so ask me the question again.
Okay, so you said 13 or 14 years old. He lost his ministry. There was a scandal behind it. What was the scandal and what happened there?
So Dad had same-sex attraction. And to this day, he tells me he was faithful to Mom during that time, but confided in some people in the church community that he had a same-sex attraction. And a pastor one town over heard about it, came to our house. He drove a big Cadillac, big white Cadillac, and I answered the door. His name was Mickey Humphreys. And in the South, we say brother Mickey. So Brother Mickey came over, and as a maybe 13-year-old, I opened the door for him. He asked for Dad.
Yeah. And
at the end of that day, Dad had been crying. It was pretty obvious. So asked me and my brother and sister one at a time to go back to the back bedroom, and he told us that he was gay, which as a 13-year-old kid in the Bible Belt, I didn't really even know what that was, except that was a joke. Like we would make jokes, but we didn't know anybody that said they were gay. So that was a huge shock, and then left the ministry after that.
Okay,
and that's when he went back to school for therapy.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years when I was 16, I started going to college.
I was under the impression that there was actually a homosexual affair that was uncovered, but it was just the attraction itself was enough for him to be like, you know what, if people knew this about me, that they wouldn't.
This was the late 80s in the Bible Belt.
Yeah.
And again, he tells me he had, at that point, had not been unfaithful. He went on to be unfaithful to my mom and really hurt her.
Yeah.
But at that point, he says that he wasn't. And
how long did they stay married after the revelation that he was gay?
So I think he had been talking to Mom before this, but I don't know when he would have said something to her the first time. But so Amy and I got married. I was 21 when we got married, and they got a divorce the year before. So 7 years after I found out.
Okay. Wow. I wonder what those conversations were like for 7 years, or that dynamic in the household was like, because you left fairly soon after that.
Yeah.
So maybe you didn't see
I love my mom. She was an amazing person. She's very loyal, very committed, and near the end, I mean, I'm actually the one that said, you need to get a divorce. Because at that point, he had cheated many times. And through tears, she just said, I wasn't raised to walk away from my marriage. And so I think that's what it was. She just wanted to be faithful. And I said, Mom, you're holding up one end of a covenant that was dropped in the dirt a long time ago. So you can do what you want, but I think you should probably move on. And so she did.
Yeah. Okay. So fast forward, you've been at Lake Providence Church for 9 years. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then what happened there? How did you leave? What kind of reputation did you build for yourself at that point? Yeah, why did you leave and where'd you go?
I've been building connections with churches and leaders at a pretty massive friendship group, and in that context, I had some talent relative to other people because it was a smaller context, smaller churches. I certainly wouldn't compare my musical ability to the people that we see every Sunday, but so people would invite me all the time to go to their churches and lead worship. So I decided to take a step out from Providence Church and start traveling and doing that kind of thing. And everybody was very supportive. We maintain friendships there even still today.
Yeah.
So no, there was no tension. There was no trouble. It was all pretty smooth.
Yeah. Where'd you go? Or what happened after 9 years? And
I went broke.
Okay. You decided
it wasn't the best. Like I would go
501c3 wasn't the best
nonprofit in every sense of the word. I would go to churches and, I would serve. I would do my best, but these churches, some of them were very generous, and one church I went to, I spent $50 in gas. I had a pickup truck at the time. It's quite a long drive.
Is that the one I shot the window out of?
Oh, same truck, yes.
Oh, boy.
But, yeah. And I think they gave me $50. So that was my income for that, for that Sunday.
You netted $0.
Yeah.
All right.
So, I mean, it was not a prosperous time, but it was a defining time because I realized that just because sometimes we think something must be better on the other side of something,
yeah, that
making a leap without having real clarity on what you want to do is not always wise. What I tell people now, because I went through that, which it wasn't terrible, it was a good learning experience, was keep doing your job until your side gig eats the job. Yeah. Keep doing the thing that brings you the stable income. And then if you have a dream, apply some time in there. And when it starts to kick in revenue and you can kind of put your feet on it and it's stable, well, then that's a good idea to shift. But
yeah,
sometimes, especially when people are frustrated, I think sometimes they jump in calling it like chasing a dream. And you can get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, for sure.
Without a plan.
You got to be able to pay your mortgage payment or whatever it is. But okay, so sounds like you did some side hustles. You were leading worship at a bunch of churches, and then did you make some connections there? What happened after you were kind of freelancing?
Yeah, one of the things I was doing in that season, I started playing in a studio, playing keys at a recording studio in West Monroe, Louisiana. It's a French name. It's Soyer.
Okay.
I don't even know how to spell it, but there's an Oignnier in there somewhere. But anyway,
right.
Soyer Recording Studios. So I met the producer there, Carvel Avis.
Okay.
And he was in the band at a large church in West Monroe.
Yeah.
First Baptist West Monroe. And I had always been raised in a different kind of church than Baptist churches. And so he would invite me, hey, come to my church.
Was non-denominational a thing when you were a kid?
Yeah.
Okay.
But then there's different kinds of non-denominational. So, but where we were, a lot of Pentecostals, a lot of Baptists, and a lot of Catholics.
Okay.
So even the non-denominational churches looked a little bit like a Baptist church or a Pentecostal church. Yeah. So my background was a little more Pentecostal.
All right. So you meet Carvel Avis at this recording studio, and he was just having you sing on projects that he was working on?
Play keys, sing. Yeah. And so he and I became good friends, and he started inviting me to his church, and I was like, I don't go to a Baptist church. You know what I mean? I thought I was a big deal. And which is funny because over the years after I connected there, that was an amazing church. They did some great things. So Amy and I decided to visit, and it was, people call it First West. First West was a church of 4,000 people in a town of 14,000.
Yeah.
Which, if you know anything about market share or things like that, that's unheard of.
Yeah.
So everybody went there, and when I visited, I saw why. There was lots and lots of people from different backgrounds. The music was great, but the pastor, he would preach. I wasn't blown away by his messages, but I would walk away just thinking about the content. And it took me a little while because I was like, you know what, let's go back next week. Let's go back next week. So we went back. It took me a few weeks to realize this guy was probably the best preacher I had heard before, because everybody else, I thought, they're awesome. But when David Youth would preach at First West, I would walk away thinking, Jesus is awesome. And I thought, that's actually a gift, to be able to not be the point when you preach a message, for God to be the point, the principle at play to be the point, but not for people to walk away and say, wow, that person was amazing. You know?
Right.
So that,
well, if you have to add all these theatrics and the screaming and the, I don't know, like I listen to a lot of preachers, like I'm trying to think of an example, like Kenneth Copeland, for example. I rebuke the devil in Jesus' name. And it's like, dude, what are you doing? Like it's just so...
I hope that clip right there goes viral. I hope that's your breakout moment, is you rebuking the devil like that.
But it's just like, it's like, dude, that to me does not seem legitimately like from the Holy Spirit. You know, that to me is like, that's theatrical. And that's like, I don't know.
I think I understand what you're saying.
It's exciting, it's engaging, and maybe even fun, but it's like, I don't know, that it's like, if you're having to go through that and you're like, I like even yelling, like, okay, I get that you get passionate or whatever it is, but like, I don't know. There's sometimes you just know when you see it, like that does not seem legit or genuine to me. Like you're really
if you have
a
concern, then you shouldn't follow that person.
Yeah.
I would separate that from just judging a different ministry, because, you know, for example, Kenneth Copeland, I think he's in his 80s.
Yeah.
So he would have been learning ministry from the tent revivalists, maybe of the 50s, 60s, 70s.
Right.
Which were a very intense group. And they were part of the Americana Christian experience, you know? So I think some of that...
That's a good point. I don't mean to like belittle his style of ministry necessarily, but there's just certain times where it's like, I don't know. I feel like some of it seems a little over the top. Like, okay, is that really spirit filled, or is that just your own kind of take on the...
Let me take a stab at this idea. I think the biggest value, not being unremarkable, again, I'm just kind of thinking through this in real time, but communicating in a way that people remember the principle, or they think about, kind of like what I was saying, like, man, Jesus is amazing. I think what that does is it makes it less about the personality and more about the head of the church, which is Jesus. And the reason I think that's important is because leaders, men and women, we die, we go away. And you never want to lead people in such a way that they can't go any further once that personality is removed.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're saying too. When there's so much of an individual's personality in it, a lot of people get discipled into thinking that is what spirituality is. Well, maybe, but if we know anything about the Creator, he's creative and he comes through different people in different ways. So if you get too hung up on just one thing, you miss out.
Yeah.
I think on a lot, especially when that leader goes away, they die,
right.
They get discredited or something happens. And I see a lot of people, even at Rez, that when they left I call it the old Rez, they don't go to church anywhere. I think that's a pretty massive act of spiritual neglect.
Yeah.
to lead congregation in such a way that they can't learn from anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to be attached to a finite personality. That's for sure. Okay, well, there's a lot of direction I could go with that. But I do want to hear just the rest of your story. First of all, so you're at First West. The music is great. The pastor you appreciate tremendously because it sounds like he's not just glorifying himself or making himself look awesome, but he's actually glorifying the name of God. So how long did you stay there for? And what were you doing? You were worship leading while you were there?
So so a couple things. One more thing I'll say about David Youth, he had a photographic memory for names.
Okay.
So even though it was several thousand people in the church, it felt like a small church because once he met you, he never forgot.
Yeah.
So I met him the first Sunday. Amy and I were there. And Amy's grandmother had some health issues. And so he just walked over, talked to us. Jonathan, this is Amy. He says, hey, is there anything I can pray with you about? And Amy said, my grandmother, you can pray for my grandmother. There's some health issues. The next Sunday, we sat on the other side of the church. He walks over to us. He says, hey, Jonathan, Amy, you guys sat over there last week. How's your grandmother?
No way. Wow.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you have the brain power for that when you're meeting probably 100 people a week.
Yeah.
That was so impressive. You know, people want to be known.
Yeah.
And so that meant a lot. Shortly after that, they invited me to volunteer on the worship team. They knew I was a musician because of my connection with Carvel, the studio guy.
Yeah.
And so I did that for a little while. And then they asked me, Carvel kept saying, he can sing too.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, we're fine. Because I was enjoying having some downtime on Sundays. I had started a little business. We don't have to talk about that.
Okay.
But the point is I had some income.
So what kind of business was it? No, I'm kidding.
Let's spend the rest of the time. I provided transportation for a group of halfway houses in Louisiana. So I had 15 vans and 15...
For people who don't know, what is a halfway house?
People who are, at least in Louisiana, nonviolent, non-sex offenders who have enough of a track record of good behavior. They're not quite ready for freedom, but they can get out of the prison system. So they would get into halfway houses where they had to stay at the halfway house, but they could get a job, shop, go to the doctor.
Are these people with ankle monitors? Okay.
Some of them should have had ankle monitors, but most of them had earned it, you know, and were really trying to better themselves.
Yeah. And who founded or who was in charge of this halfway house?
Kathy Biedenhorn founded City of Faith.
Yes. That's a church.
That was the halfway house.
Oh, okay.
She called it City of Faith.
Gotcha.
And she was one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. She's a really awesome person of prayer. She and her husband, they were very wealthy, so she didn't need to do prison ministry. She didn't need this.
Yeah.
But she wanted to make a difference. So
what were they wealthy from?
Two things. Her husband's grandfather invented the bottling process for Coca-Cola.
Okay. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. That's a good idea, you know?
Yeah.
I think we could bottle this. And that becomes like the biggest, carbonated bottled drinks is like one of the biggest industries, right?
Yeah.
And then Delta Airlines got its start in Louisiana where we were. It started out as a crop dusting agency.
Okay.
So the Louisiana Delta is why they called it Delta Airlines.
Yeah.
So a lot of people that bought stock very early in Delta, including the Biedenhorn family, are from Monroe, West Monroe, Louisiana.
There you go.
So that area has more millionaires per capita than I think almost any other part of the U.S.
Really?
Coca-Cola and Delta.
Wow.
So Kathy, very wealthy, but she would go to these prisons. Angola prison in South Louisiana, very famous. It was a slave plantation that was converted to a prison, maximum security prison. We would go down there. I would lead worship, and she would preach. And you'd see these inmates see this well-dressed, wealthy woman walk in, and you could see them just kind of like, whatever. But then by the time she was finished preaching, she had those people on their feet, clapping, hands up. Oh, she was She was an amazing person.
Yeah.
So anyway, I was working for City of Faith, providing transportation for the halfway house, which meant my Sundays were pretty free and I didn't need income.
Yeah.
So when Carville kept saying, he can sing, they finally got me to do a song.
Did you play piano before the first time you sang? Just
Yeah.
keyboard?
So they had a grand piano, and someone named Ann Finn, a great person, she played that, and then I played keys like organ, electric piano, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So when I sang, they moved me over to the grand piano. I did a song. I Believe. Remember that old song I used to do? And this is funny. I can't believe I'm talking about this. This is like the guy who's still proud of his old accomplishments. But anyway, they, for the first time in that church's history, they started getting phone calls all week. Can we have that guy come back?
No way.
Yeah. And so then from then on, it was pretty easy. I started leading worship and then became the worship pastor there.
Yeah.
So I was there 5 or 6 years before we moved out here.
And then, so you said you went to college at 16. You dropped out, or basically just stopped going to class. Did you ever decide to go back?
Yes. So I went back.
And why?
I just wanted to finish. I felt like my friends and family that had degrees, it was pretty clear they made more money. I don't know if that's how it is today, but I know at that point, in fact, when I got my degree, the church where I was already working gave me a $20,000 a year raise.
Okay.
So
at First West.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were you already on their staff as a paid employee?
So it started out as every weekend they would give me like $100 to play keys. Then when I started leading worship, they upped it. Then they put me on part-time because I started leading worship every weekend. Then when the worship pastor left, they put me on full-time. Then I graduated, and then they gave me a bump. So it kind of happened like that.
Yeah. So going back to college sounds like it was, at least in your situation, it was beneficial.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
I wanted to finish, and even though I'd left home at 16, my dad was still pretty involved. Even though it was from a distance, we talked about education. His philosophy on education was, a lot of high expectations, and I still wanted to make him proud.
Yeah.
So got my degree. I think I was 30 or 31.
Okay. So what was that like going to college when you're in your late 20s, early 30s, and everyone around you is 18, 19, 20 years old?
I never went at the right age. I went too young and I went too old. It was fine after the first semester, but at first it was embarrassing because my classmates would call me sir, and you're a non-traditional student, aren't you? And I'm like, yep. That just means I'm old. But I actually really enjoyed learning. So when I went at 16, I just wanted to pass.
Yeah.
But when I was 28, 29, I loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love learning. So that was really rich for me, and I was able to hold these other jobs and do the school thing. That was a really fun season.
Okay, so then First West, you get full-time, there's a pay raise. How long were you there for, and then why did you leave, and what was the circumstances surrounding that?
I was there 5 years. The pastor, David Youth, ended up moving to Orlando, First Baptist Orlando, and there was an interim period, and then a new guy came in, and he's fine, but he and I we didn't hit it off the way I did with the staff that had been there.
Yeah.
And he really appreciated that the congregation respected and followed my leadership, so he saw the value in that, but we just never made a personal connection. And so I grew a little frustrated there, and I was careful. I would talk to people not connected to the church because I didn't want to hurt the nonprofit. It's like I did have my frustrations, but I didn't want to spread division in the church.
Yeah.
So I spoke to some friends, and one of my friends, another guy who's in Orlando, his name's John Marks. He had worked with me. He was the worship pastor before I became the worship pastor at First West. He started looking, I think it was churchstaffing.com, just looking for other things for me.
Yeah.
And found Resurrection Fellowship, Rez Church, but it was Resurrection Fellowship.
Yeah.
That they were looking for a worship pastor. So he called this church and said, are you still taking resumes? And they said, well, we've received 120. Yeah, we're about to close. And he said, well, do yourself a favor and accept one more. I'm going to have my friends send you one more. And so he called me and said, I just told some people that you're going to send them your resume.
Yeah. Okay. So I have to ask you, why did John Marks, why Rez? Was it the biggest church that had an opening? Was it the highest paying job that had an opening? Why this like random church in Colorado that he just decided, like he felt gravitated towards?
I think because he knew Rez was more of a similar culture to what I was used to.
Okay.
I mean, there are bigger churches, and there are, if you were looking to do so I was at First West, the career move would be to stay in that denomination and just keep moving to bigger churches. That was really never a value of mine, but that's what a lot of my friends did. But John Marks was, he was awesome. He understood that my culture was maybe not exactly aligned with that denomination. So he reached out here and made an effective connection.
Yep. And then what was the deciding factor for you why did you decide to move to Colorado? What was like the big pull for you? Especially like you have no friends here, you have no family, never been here before. Like what was it that was just like, okay, like it's time to move the whole family here?
Well, there was an opportunity. So we flew out. I flew out for a worship night and a job interview. And we landed at DIA, and we're driving I-25. Amy looks at the Rocky Mountains and says, I've always wanted to live here.
No way.
And we've been married 12 years at that point. I was like, who are you? And why haven't you told me this? But once she said that, I thought, okay, there is an opportunity here. This is something that she's clearly dreamed about in her life. So I thought, if I can get this, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
So, and then the pastor at the time, we did the interview, we did the worship night, then we flew home. And several days passed, and the pastor of Rez at the time called me and said, there are two candidates who are neck and neck for this position.
Yeah.
But that other guy's just not married to Amy. That's funny. So I was flattered, and so the rest is history.
So you decide to accept the worship leading job at Rez, and how long did you do that for? What happened after that? And then what are you doing today?
So I served as the worship pastor of Rez for 1 year, actually almost 2 years. But in that first year, I was approached by Pastor John to consider taking Rez and being the next pastor. And so, I took quite a lot of time to pray about that. And then once we accepted, then he took us through, I think, about 10 months of transition.
Okay.
And then I was announced and the vote happened. And so Father's Day of 2010, I became the lead pastor of Rez, and I've been here ever since, and love it. Wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yep. And then, okay, and what are you doing today? Is it, how have things changed since then? And then, do you have a similar approach to what you've always had, or have you adopted new ideas, or like what's
within the church or within my own life?
Both.
Well, I didn't want to continue a personality-driven ministry. I wanted to move toward a process-driven ministry so that people could be discipled in a way that if something happens to me or if they move away, they connect in a healthy way with other churches. And I think we've done that successfully. It cost us a little something to make that transition, but it was worth it. And then for me personally, just aging and now being a grandparent, I think a lot about the next generation. I think about spending a little bit of my time mentoring people younger than me, which I do. Spending a lot of time with my grandkids and just kind of being okay with not being the cool guy anymore. You know what I mean? Like I'm pushing 50.
I think you're pretty cool.
Come on.
Right?
You're the cool guy. Look at this hat. Come on. And, but it's not bad. It's not bad to be able to be proud of the next generation and start to think in terms of what can I hand off? How can I coach? Can I move from being kind of a boss to more of a counselor? So it's rewarding.
That leads in perfectly to my last question. What's next for you? What's next for you?
A number of guys in ministry right around my age were starting to connect and learn from each other and just really start to build relationships so that we can help each other transition through what we call going from being a king to being a sage. Because we saw the generation before us, they did that alone. And they had a hard time letting go. So we're building good support systems for each other so that we can let go gracefully, have good help to find the right people to replace us. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah.
But it is where my mind is. It's like, okay, raising up the right leaders behind me and supporting them 100% in ways that I wish I'd been supported when I became the lead pastor.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, any last words or anything you want to shout out or any brands that you want to shout out?
Brands?
Yeah, I don't know. You know.
This amazing podcast.
Come on, stop
I'm
it.
proud of you, and I think you're a great dad, and I think you're really good at your job, and I actually enjoy hanging out, even in this environment.
Likewise. Do you like cigars? I hope you do.
For the last few years, I've been smoking hand-rolled tobacco.
There you go.
When I go on fishing trips and sit around by a campfire, I'll smoke a cigar. And a buddy of mine, Tyler Roach, we started talking about dreams that he had. And he and his wife, they want to be able to fight human trafficking. They want to own their own business. And so as we start talking through this, I had connected with another guy who, his name's Terry, but he's the owner of T.L. Johnson Cigar Company. And I just thought, okay, that's interesting. So I have a buddy who enjoys cigars, wants to start a company, wants to fight human trafficking with the proceeds. And I have a friend who could be the entire supply chain. Yeah. And so I connected them, and For God and Country Cigars was born. And so those premium cigars, they're from the Dominican. They're great smoke, and the money goes toward an amazing cause. So I don't know if you're going to advertise for it on this podcast, but thanks for giving me the chance to talk about that.
Let's do it, man. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that we've been in operation for just a couple of months, and we're moving quickly. So it's exciting.
Where can people find those cigars if they wanted to?
ForGodAndCountryCigars.com.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, I appreciate your time.
I love you.
Thank you so much. Love you too, man. We'll have to do it again one of these days.
Okay.
But, yeah.